The rain had already been falling for 3 days. In Seattle, that wasn't unusual, but the sound of it that morning felt different. Hollow. Distant. Like it was falling somewhere else, not against the windows of the modest 2-story house on Birch Avenue. Ethan Hale sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. His wife, Claire, stood by the counter, half turned away from him, scrolling through her phone as she sipped her almond milk latte. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and wet wood. She looked perfect, in the way people look perfect when they're trying to. Her hair was done, her makeup soft and deliberate, a faint perfume of citrus and something floral. Two put together for a random Tuesday morning. Got a big client meeting today? Ethan asked casually, his voice cutting through the hum of the refrigerator. Claire blinked, looked up briefly. Oh, yeah. New design pitch for a tech company. They're kind of a big deal. He nodded. You've been getting a lot of those lately. Yeah, she said, smiling faintly, eyes darting back to her phone. Good problem to have, right? Ethan forced a chuckle. Sure. Good problem. But something was off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it had started weeks ago, maybe months. The way she lingered in the bathroom longer than usual. The way she guarded her phone when it buzzed. How she seemed more alive lately, glowing even, but not because of him. He'd convinced himself it was stress, or maybe she was just bored. But deep down, beneath the calm surface of his voice, something in him whispered that he was being lied to. When she kissed him goodbye at the door, her lips brushed his cheek like the wing of a moth, brief, cold, almost apologetic. He watched her drive off into the rain, taillights vanishing into the gray morning, and felt that same emptiness again, the silence between storms. Ethan worked as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company downtown. His life was a series of quiet routines: wake up, drive, code, go home. He wasn't unhappy, just settled. And that used to be enough. But now, when he came home, Claire wasn't there. She had late meetings, client dinners, networking events. Always explanations, always plausible. Until one night, he noticed her perfume again, not the one she wore at home, but the one she used when they first started dating. Why now? He thought. When she came in, he was sitting in the living room, lights dimmed, pretending to scroll through Netflix. Hey, she said softly, hanging her coat. You're still up? Yeah. Just, couldn't sleep. Rough day. He nodded. Yeah. Something like that. She smiled faintly and walked past him, and that's when he noticed it, a faint smudge of lipstick, not hers, on the collar of her trench coat. Dark red. Claire, he said quietly. She turned. Yeah. You wearing new lipstick? She frowned. No, why? He gestured subtly. Your coat. She looked down. A pause. Oh, that? Must have been from the client dinner. You know how people hug hello and goodbye. He nodded again, watching her eyes carefully. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just smiled, but it was too fast, too smooth. Later that night, as she showered, he stood outside the bathroom door listening to the faint sound of water and muffled humming. His reflection in the hallway mirror looked strange, tired, almost frightened. That was the night he knew. He didn't have proof, not yet. But his gut had already decided. Suspicion is a quiet poison. It doesn't kill you right away, it waits. Over the next week, Ethan became a detective in his own home. He wasn't proud of it. He told himself it was for closure, for truth. One morning, after Claire left for work, he sat at her vanity, staring at her laptop. She'd recently changed her password, something she hadn't done in years. It took him 3 tries, her mother's birthday, their wedding date, and finally, the name of a boutique downtown where she'd bought a red dress last month. Clever, he thought. Her email opened like a confession. Among the clutter of invoices and work threads, there it was, Evan, design consultation. Subject line, last night. His pulse quickened. He clicked. You left your scarf in my car again. Next time, I'm not giving it back unless you make me. P.S. You were incredible. I can still smell your perfume. Ethan stared at the words until they blurred. He scrolled. There were more, dozens of messages, spread over months. They talked about projects, dinners, nights in hotel rooms. She'd written things he couldn't imagine her saying anymore, playful, intimate, alive. He sat back, trembling. The silence of the house pressed against him. When she came home that evening, he said nothing. He made dinner, poured wine, and listened to her talk about her day like nothing was wrong. But inside him, something had changed. Something cold. Something permanent. Evan was a creative director at a startup downtown. Young, charming, arrogant, the kind of man who wore confidence like cologne. Ethan had seen his picture on LinkedIn once, after snooping through Claire's calendar. A week later, Ethan saw him in person. By accident, or maybe fate. He was waiting to pick Claire up from work, she'd left her car at the shop. He parked outside the design agency and saw her through the window, laughing with a tall man in a gray blazer. Evan. She touched his arm as she spoke. Lightly. Familiar. Then Evan leaned in, whispered something, and she smiled, that soft, private smile Ethan hadn't seen in years. Something inside him cracked like glass. When she got into the car, she smelled of rain and something foreign. You're early, she said, surprised. Yeah, Ethan said, starting the engine. Just missed you. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of comfort anymore. It was the silence of knowing. It happened on a Thursday. He waited until she came home, until she poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window scrolling through her phone. Claire, he said quietly, placing his phone on the table. Who's Evan? Her body stiffened. What? Evan. From work. Her lips parted. He's a client. He opened her emails, the ones he'd sent to himself earlier that day. She froze. The room filled with silence so heavy it felt physical. Her eyes shimmered, not with guilt, but fear. Ethan. How long? He whispered. She looked down. 6 months. He closed his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside beat against the windows like the world was trying to drown them out. Finally, she said, it wasn't supposed to happen. I felt like I was disappearing. You stopped seeing me. And you thought sleeping with someone else would fix that, he said bitterly. No, she said softly. It just made me feel alive again. He laughed once, a hollow, broken sound. That night, he packed a bag and left. For 2 weeks, he stayed in a small motel by the bay, the kind with flickering neon signs and coffee that tasted like rust. He didn't call her. She didn't call him. Every night, he replayed their marriage like a movie, trying to find the scene where everything had gone wrong. He realized there wasn't one. It was slow, like erosion. And yet, he couldn't stop loving her. That was the worst part. One night, he drove back to the house. Her car was there. The lights were on. Through the window, he saw her sitting alone, staring at the same spot on the couch where he used to sit. He turned off the car and just watched her, until she looked up and saw him. Their eyes met across the rain. Neither of them moved. Then she closed the curtain. Ethan never planned revenge. It came naturally. He discovered that Evan's company had a big investor meeting coming up, and Ethan, with his connections in tech, knew one of the venture partners. A few quiet words, a few strategic emails, and Evan's name started circulating for all the wrong reasons. Rumors. Allegations. Questionable ethics. Within weeks, Evan's reputation was in ruins. Claire's firm dropped his account. When she found out, she showed up at the motel, eyes wild. "Did you do this?" she demanded. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You ruined my life," he said quietly. "I just evened the score." Her lip trembled. "You think that makes us even?" He turned away. "No. But it's a start." They signed the papers on a gray morning. No lawyers, no shouting. Just signatures and silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know," he said. "So am I." When she left, she didn't look back. He stood in the empty kitchen, the same one where it began, and realized he'd never hear her humming again. And yet, for the first time in months, he could breathe. Months passed. The house sold. He moved into a small apartment overlooking the Sound. The city kept raining, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. Sometimes, he saw her in dreams, not as the woman who betrayed him, but the woman he once loved. The one who laughed under cheap umbrellas and danced barefoot on hardwood floors. But dreams are liars, too. He learned to stop chasing ghosts. On a rare clear evening, Ethan walked to the water's edge. The air smelled of salt and pine. He stood there for a long time, listening to the soft rush of waves. He thought about love, how it can be both beautiful and cruel, how it builds and breaks us in equal measure. And when the first drop of rain fell again, he smiled. Because he finally understood that peace doesn't come after the storm, it comes in the quiet between them. Ethan had lived in the new apartment for almost 8 months. The walls were white, bare, and echoing, the kind of emptiness that swallows sound. Every morning, he woke before sunrise. He'd make coffee, stare out at the mist rolling over Puget Sound, and watch the ferries drift like ghosts through the gray. The routine was comfort. Predictable. Quiet. He'd started running again, long, slow jogs through the damp streets of Ballard, the kind of runs that burned your lungs but numbed your thoughts. People told him he looked good. Healthier, even. But inside, he still felt hollow. He hadn't spoken to Claire in almost a year. Not since the divorce. Not since that final, quiet goodbye in the courthouse hallway where she'd said, "I hope you find peace," and he'd replied, "You too," though neither of them really believed it. Peace wasn't what he found. What he found was emptiness, the kind that follows you into every room. It arrived on a Tuesday, in a plain white envelope with no return address. Her handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, slanted, careful. He almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. "Ethan. I don't know if I have the right to write this. I know what I did, and I know you don't owe me forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I left Seattle. I couldn't stay, too many ghosts here. I'm in Portland now, working freelance. Trying to rebuild, I guess. You were right, about Evan. He was everything I thought I wanted, and nothing I actually needed. It ended badly. Maybe that's justice. Anyway, I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Truly. Claire." He read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it on the table. For the rest of the evening, he did nothing, didn't eat, didn't turn on the TV. He just sat there, listening to the rain. Her words didn't bring closure. They just reopened old wounds he tried to stitch shut. But beneath the ache, there was something else, a strange, quiet pity. For her. For both of them. 2 weeks later, Ethan found himself in a small coffee shop near Pike Place Market. It was the kind of place Claire used to love, exposed brick walls, indie music, latte art shaped like hearts. He was halfway through his Americano when someone asked, "Mind if I sit here?" He looked up. A woman, maybe mid-30s, holding a laptop and smiling politely. She had dark hair tucked under a gray beanie and eyes that looked familiar in their tiredness. "Sure," he said. Her name was Rachel. Graphic designer, newly divorced. They talked for over an hour, about work, about Seattle's endless rain, about how hard it was to start over at 38. When she laughed, it wasn't flirtatious. It was human. Simple. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like a ghost. They began meeting on weekends, not dates, not exactly. Just two people orbiting the same loneliness. Walks by the waterfront. Coffee. Shared silences that didn't feel awkward. But every time Rachel smiled too kindly or brushed his arm too casually, Ethan's chest tightened. His mind went back, to Claire, to the nights of laughter that turned into lies. One evening, Rachel invited him to her apartment for dinner. He almost said yes. Almost. But when he saw her standing by the stove in the warm light, humming softly, just like Claire used to, something in him recoiled. He made an excuse and left. He drove until the city lights faded behind him, until he reached an overlook above the Sound. The water below shimmered like oil. He realized then that he wasn't ready to be touched again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Winter came early that year. The city was a mosaic of fog and Christmas lights. Ethan started seeing Claire in strangers, flashes of her face on the bus, echoes of her voice in passing conversations. Sometimes he even dreamed of her, not the betrayal, but the small, mundane moments, her laugh when he burned pancakes, her bare feet on hardwood floors. He started writing again, not code, but words. Little fragments, notes, unsent letters to no one. There's a version of us that still exists somewhere. One that didn't break. But maybe breaking was the only way to find who we really were. He didn't know if he was writing to her or to himself. It was nearly a year later when he saw her again. He was coming out of a bookstore downtown when he heard his name, soft, uncertain. Ethan. He turned. Claire stood there, hair shorter now, face thinner, eyes older. She looked human again. Not the polished woman he once loved, but something real. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. "I didn't know you were back in Seattle," he said finally. "I'm not," she said. "Just visiting for a week. My sister's having a baby." He nodded. "You look good." "So do you." They ended up at a small cafe nearby, just like old times. The conversation was polite, weather, work, her new life in Portland. Then, after a pause, she said quietly, "I still think about us sometimes." He stared at his coffee. "I do too. But it feels like a different life." "It was," she said softly. "But it mattered." When they parted, there was no hug, no promise of contact. Just a mutual understanding, the kind that comes when love has burned out but the ashes still warm your hands. That night, the rain came back, fierce, relentless. Ethan lay in bed listening to it hammer the windows, the same sound that had marked the beginning and end of his marriage. He realized he wasn't angry anymore. He didn't forgive her, not exactly. But he understood her now. They'd both been lonely long before the affair began. They'd both stopped reaching out when it still mattered. In the dark, he whispered to no one, "We were both guilty." And for the first time, the words didn't hurt. Weeks later, he found Claire's old letter again, tucked in a drawer. He sat at his desk and wrote his own. "Claire. I used to think you destroyed me. But maybe you just revealed what was already broken. I've stopped looking for closure. Some things don't close, they just fade until they stop bleeding. Wherever you are, I hope you found what you were looking for. Or at least learned to live with what you lost. Ethan." He folded it, sealed it, and placed it in an envelope. But he never mailed it. He simply left it on the windowsill, where the sunlight could touch it in the morning. Months passed. The city thawed. One afternoon, he ran into Rachel again, same cafe, same corner table. She smiled. "Hey, stranger. You disappeared." He hesitated. "Yeah. I had to figure some things out." "Did you?" she asked. "I think so," he said. They talked for an hour. This time, when she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. Years later, when Ethan looked back, he realized that what defined his life wasn't the betrayal, it was what came after. The resilience. The quiet forgiveness. The way pain slowly became wisdom. He never remarried. But he learned how to love again, gently, cautiously, without illusions. And sometimes, when the rain fell just right, he'd think of Claire, not with anger, not with longing, but with a kind of gratitude. Because some storms don't destroy you. They strip you down until all that's left is who you really are. 6 years had passed since Ethan last saw Claire. Seattle had changed, new towers, new faces, new noise, but the rain was still the same. It fell with that familiar rhythm, soft and endless, like time itself refusing to stop. Ethan was 43 now. A little gray at the temples, a little slower in the mornings, but calmer. He'd built a small software consulting business, enough to live comfortably. Rachel was still in his life, not quite a partner, not quite a friend. Something steady, something kind. They shared a small apartment by Green Lake. It wasn't love the way he once knew it, not fire and hunger, but warmth and quiet. Maybe that was enough. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was still, he still dreamed of Claire. Not of what she did, but of what they were, laughter, warmth, the easy touch of familiarity. The past never really leaves you. It just learns to whisper instead of scream. It came on a Wednesday morning. Ethan was reviewing a client proposal when his phone rang, an unknown Oregon number. "Hello." The voice on the other end was soft, hesitant. "Mr. Hale? My name is Dr. Marin. I'm calling from Portland General Hospital." Ethan's chest tightened. "Yes. I'm afraid I'm calling about Claire Hale. You're listed as her emergency contact." He froze. What happened?" "She's been diagnosed with late-stage lymphoma. She declined to give us any family contact except you." For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. He hadn't heard her voice in years, hadn't seen her face, and now, this. "When can I see her?" he asked quietly. The drive down I-5 felt longer than it should have. Gray sky, cold wind, miles of highway flashing past like memories. When he reached Portland, the rain had already begun, heavier, colder. The hospital was quiet, almost reverent. The sterile smell hit him the moment he stepped through the doors. Room 412. He hesitated outside the door, hand hovering just above the handle. Then, slowly, he went in. She was thinner, frilier, her hair short and graying at the roots. But her eyes, those same blue eyes, still held that calm intensity. "Ethan," she whispered, smiling weakly. He stood there, frozen. "Hi, Claire. You came." "Of course I did." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, two ghosts reunited by something crueler than fate. He visited every day after that. Sat beside her bed, read her the news, brought her coffee she never finished. At first, the visits were awkward, polite, careful. But soon they slipped into old rhythms. Small talk turned into stories, silence into comfort. One afternoon, as the rain tapped the window, she said, "I never stopped feeling sorry for what I did." He looked at her quietly. "You don't have to apologize again." "I do," she said. "Because you deserved more. And I ruined it." He reached for her hand, fragile and cold. "We both ruined it, Claire. You just made the first move." She smiled sadly. "That sounds like you." They both laughed, softly, tiredly, as if remembering who they used to be. Over the weeks, Ethan began finding things in her hospital drawer, a small notebook filled with letters. Some were addressed to him. Others, to no one. She'd been writing them for years. I used to dream you'd forgive me, but then I realized it wasn't forgiveness I wanted, it was for you to remember that once, I was good. Love doesn't vanish when it ends. It just hides in strange corners of your heart, waiting for quiet moments like this. He read them in silence, his eyes burning. The next morning, he brought her his own letter, the one he'd written years ago and never sent. She smiled when she read it. Maybe we were just broken in the same way, she whispered. Maybe that's why we found each other, he said. It happened quietly, almost tenderly. He'd fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, her hand still in his. When he woke, the rain had stopped, the first clear morning in weeks. But she wasn't breathing. For a long moment, he didn't move. Just watched the sunlight crawl across her face. She looked peaceful. Younger, somehow. He pressed her hand to his lips and whispered, "You finally found your quiet." Then he sat there until the nurses came. Only a few people came, a handful of colleagues, her sister, and Ethan. It was held in a small chapel surrounded by trees dripping with rain. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just stood there as the pastor read from her favorite poem. We are not gone, only changed. Like rain returning to the sea. After the service, her sister handed him an envelope. She wanted you to have this, she said. Inside was a single photograph, the two of them on their wedding day, smiling beneath a gray Seattle sky, and a note. Thank you for coming back to me, even at the end. He folded it carefully, slid it into his pocket, and walked out into the rain. Months later, Ethan was back in Seattle. Life went on, client meetings, coffee with Rachel, quiet mornings by the water. But something in him had changed. The bitterness was gone. The anger, the questions, all washed away. He began to write again. Not letters this time, a memoir. He titled it, The Quiet Between Storms. It wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about love, real, imperfect, human love that breaks and heals and breaks again. On the last page, he wrote. Some storms return not to destroy us, but to remind us how much we've survived. One evening, Rachel found the manuscript on his desk. She read it quietly, then turned to him with tears in her eyes. Did you love her? She asked softly. He nodded. I did. Do you still? He paused. In a way. But not like before. What's left isn't love, it's peace. She smiled faintly. Then maybe you're ready. He took her hand, warm, alive, real, and held it, not as a replacement for the past, but as a choice for the future. Years later, Ethan would sometimes stand by the window, watching the drizzle coat the glass, and think of Claire. Not with sorrow, not even with nostalgia, just quiet gratitude. Because in losing her, he'd found himself. And when the rain stopped, he finally understood what she had always meant. That peace doesn't come after the storm, or between them. It comes when you learn to live inside it. It had been nearly 10 years since Claire's funeral. Seattle had changed again, cranes, condos, coffee shops where bookstores used to be. But some corners of the city remained untouched, preserved like memories. One of them was Birch Avenue. Ethan hadn't been there since the day he moved out. He wasn't sure why he came back, maybe curiosity, maybe closure. Maybe both. The house still stood, a little older now, the paint fading, the fence crooked. Someone else lived there, children's toys in the yard, a bicycle leaning by the porch. Life had gone on without him, as it should. He parked across the street and just sat there, watching. The sound of rain on the windshield blurred the edges of everything. He remembered the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen. The way Claire used to hum when she thought he wasn't listening. The sound of her laughter echoing up the stairs. He'd told himself he'd forgotten those details. But memory has a way of surviving the storms we think will erase it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn, folded envelope, the same one she'd given him at her funeral. He'd carried it for years, unread. He wasn't ready then. But now, maybe he was. He opened it. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. Her handwriting was the same as ever, deliberate, graceful, still alive somehow. Ethan. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you stayed. I like that thought. You always were the one who stayed when things got hard. I used to think our story ended in betrayal. But now I see it was always about forgiveness. You gave me that, even when I didn't deserve it. If you ever find yourself standing at our old house, don't remember the end. Remember the mornings. The coffee. The laughter. The rain. Because that's what we really were, not perfect, not forever. Just real. Thank you for loving me once. Claire. He read it twice, then closed his eyes. The ache came, soft, deep, human. Not grief anymore. Just the echo of something that once mattered. That evening, he drove to Green Lake. The same park where he used to run, where Rachel once met him with 2 cups of coffee and a patient smile. Now it was sunset, the sky streaked with gold and gray, the water reflecting everything like a mirror. He sat on a weathered bench, watching the ducks drift across the still surface. A family passed by, laughter, tiny footsteps splashing in puddles. Life. He reached into his coat again, pulled out Claire's letter, and placed it gently beside him on the bench. Then he whispered, "You can rest now." A light breeze stirred the pages. One corner of the letter fluttered open, and for a moment, he could swear he heard her voice, faint, distant, carried on the wind. When love fades, truth hits harder than any storm. He smiled. It was the same line he'd once written on her photo, years ago, the one she never saw. The rain began again, soft and endless. Ethan grew older. His hair turned silver, his hands slower. Rachel stayed, patient, quiet, understanding the way people who have also been broken understand. They never married. They didn't need to. Some bonds don't need paper to exist, they're built in silence, in kindness, in small, wordless acts of staying. Every now and then, he'd visit Claire's grave, a modest headstone shaded by a birch tree. He'd bring white lilies and stand there in silence, listening to the leaves tremble above him. He never prayed. He never asked for anything. He just stood there and was. Because some love stories don't need redemption, just remembrance. One summer morning, years later, Ethan sat by his window, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The rain had just ended. The air was clear. He looked out at the city, the same skyline, the same sound of distant ferries, and smiled faintly. His book, The Quiet Between Storms, had quietly become something of a minor success, passed around by readers who said it made them cry in all the right ways. He never told anyone it was true. He didn't need to. As he watched the first rays of sun break through the clouds, he whispered, almost to himself. I survived the storm. And maybe, that's all love ever asks of us. The camera, if this were a film, would pull back then. Out through the open window, past the rooftops and over the city, where the rain clouds drift apart and sunlight spills across the sound. And somewhere in that light, faint and fleeting, the echoes of laughter, a memory, a promise, a life that was lived honestly, even if imperfectly.